My name is Elena Voss, and I have spent most of my life being told that peace was impossible. I was 11 years old when the first ships came. I remember standing on my grandfather's farm, looking up at a sky that had turned strange colors, and asking him what was happening. He did not answer. He simply picked me up and ran. That was the day the Kryzathi Dominion introduced itself to humanity, not with words, but with fire. For 20 years after that, we fought. We lost cities. We lost fleets. We lost people whose names I still remember, even now, sitting in this quiet room with a cup of cooling tea in front of me. The Dominion was old, older than our written history. They had conquered hundreds of worlds before they ever noticed we existed. To them, we were simple, primitive, a problem to be solved quickly, and forgotten just as fast. We were not supposed to survive, but we did. Not because we were stronger, not because we had better weapons in the beginning. We survived because humans do not know how to give up gracefully. We adapt, we learn, we get back up, again and again, until the thing that knocked us down starts to wonder if it made a mistake. By the 10th year of the war, the Dominion stopped calling us primitive. By the 15th year, they stopped attacking our core worlds directly. By the 20th year, for the first time in 400 years of their recorded history, a Kryzathi fleet retreated from a battle without finishing it. That retreat is the reason I am writing this account today. I received the message on a gray morning, the kind where the light through the window makes everything look tired. I was reviewing troop rotation reports at Fleet Command when my aide, a quiet young officer named Priya, stepped into my office without knocking. That alone told me something important had happened. Priya never forgot to knock. "Commander," she said, "you need to see this." She placed a data slate on my desk. I picked it up, expecting another supply shortage or another skirmish report from the border colonies. Instead, I saw a message header that made my chest go tight. It was from the Kryzathi Dominion. Official channel, verified authentication codes. The kind of message our intelligence division had been waiting 20 years to see, and had almost stopped believing would ever come. The Dominion was requesting a peace summit. I read it 3 times before I let myself believe the words were real. The message was formal, almost overly polite, written in the careful diplomatic language of a species that rarely needed diplomacy, because it rarely needed to ask for anything. They proposed a ceasefire. They proposed a summit aboard a station they called Threshold, in a region of space that both sides had bled for but neither fully controlled. They proposed that humanity send a delegation, led by someone with what they called proven authority in matters of war. I understood immediately what that meant. They did not want a career diplomat. They wanted someone who had fought them and beaten them. They wanted me. I should have felt honored. Instead, I felt something colder settle in my stomach. The same feeling I used to get before a battle, when everything seems calm but you know it will not stay that way. "What does command think?" I asked Priya. "They're split," she said. "Some think this is real. The Dominion is losing ground on 3 fronts. Their supply lines are stretched. Maybe they finally understand they cannot win. And the others?" Priya hesitated. "The others think it's exactly what it looks like. A trap." I set the slate down and looked out the window at the training yards below, where new recruits were running formation drills in the morning cold. 20 years ago, I had been one of those recruits, young and certain that courage alone would be enough. I knew better now. Courage was necessary, but it was never enough by itself. You needed to be smart too. You needed to expect the worst, even while hoping for the best. "I think both things can be true at once," I said. "Maybe they are losing. Maybe they do want an end to this war, and maybe they still plan to trick us on the way there. Those are not opposite ideas. Sometimes a wounded animal is at its most dangerous, not its most honest." Priya nodded slowly. "So what do? "We go," I said, "but we do not go the way they expect." That afternoon, I was called before the Joint Council, a mix of human military leaders and representatives from the small handful of allied species who had joined our side over the years. The room was tense. Half the officers present had lost friends or family to the Dominion. None of them trusted this sudden offer of peace, and I did not blame them. An analyst named Dr. Renshaw stood at the front of the room, projecting the treaty document and station schematics onto the main screen. He was a careful man, the kind who noticed details other people missed, and that morning his careful nature had found something troubling. "The station itself raises questions," he said, pointing to a rotating diagram of Threshold Station. "It is described as a neutral meeting point, built specifically for this summit. But look at the docking bay measurements. They are far larger than anything required for a diplomatic shuttle. These bays are sized for warships." A murmur passed through the room. It could simply be reused Dominion infrastructure, someone offered from the back, repurposed rather than built new. "Perhaps," Renshaw said, "but there is more. The station's defense grid, according to what little sensor data we have gathered, is fully operational. That is unusual for a location meant to be neutral ground for a peace summit. Neutral ground does not usually need weapons. I studied the diagram carefully, letting the pieces settle in my mind. Every detail on its own could be explained away. Together, they painted a clearer picture. They are inviting us into a box, I said, and calling it an open door. Then we should refuse, said General Okafor, one of the senior fleet commanders, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. We should not walk into an obvious trap. With respect, sir, I said, I do not think refusing is the right choice either. The room went quiet. Okafor raised an eyebrow at me, waiting. If we refuse, I continued, the Dominion gets to tell every world watching this conflict that humanity was offered peace and chose war instead. That story will spread, whether it is true or not. It will cost us allies we cannot afford to lose. But if we accept, and if we prepare properly, we control how this moment unfolds instead of letting them control it. And if it truly is a trap? Okafor asked. I met his eyes without flinching. Then we make sure the trap costs them far more than it costs us. There was a long silence. I could see the calculation happening behind Okafor's eyes, the same calculation happening in my own mind. Every war has moments like this, moments where the safe choice and the right choice are not the same thing. Finally, the Council's senior representative, an older woman named Ambassador Chen who had survived the first Dominion invasion of Earth's outer colonies, spoke. Commander Voss will lead the delegation, she said, but we will not send her unprepared. If the Dominion wants to test whether humanity has grown weak from war, they are about to learn how wrong that assumption is. I felt a small measure of pride at her words, though pride was not exactly the right feeling for the moment. It was closer to resolve, the kind of steady, quiet determination that had carried humanity through 20 years of a war we were never supposed to survive. Over the following days, preparations moved quickly. I worked closely with our intelligence teams, our engineers, and a small group of veteran officers I trusted with my life, quite literally, given what we all suspected was waiting for us. We could not simply arm a diplomatic ship and call it a day. If the Dominion detected weapons on our approach, the treaty talks would collapse before they even began, and we would lose whatever advantage surprise might give us. So we did what humans have always done best. We got creative. I authorized a project that had been sitting in research archives for years, waiting for the right moment. It involved technology captured from a Dominion vessel early in the war, technology our engineers had spent a decade studying, adapting, and improving in ways the Dominion had never anticipated. It was not simply a copy of their weapon, it was something better, something built from human stubbornness and human refusal to accept any tool exactly as it was given. I also requested a specific class of soldier for this mission. Not soldiers built for open battlefield combat, but a smaller, quieter kind of unit, the sort trained for close spaces, sudden action, and split-second decisions, the kind of unit you send when diplomacy and combat might need to happen within the same 5 minutes. Priya found me late one evening reviewing personnel files for this exact purpose. She brought 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of me without a word. You look like you haven't slept, she said. I haven't, I admitted. Not really. Every time I close my eyes, I keep running through what could go wrong on that station. And what conclusion have you reached? I looked up at her, feeling the weight of the coming days settle more firmly across my shoulders, that we cannot control what the Dominion plans to do. We can only control how ready we are for it. So we will go to their summit, we will sit at their table, we will speak politely and listen carefully, and underneath all of that, we will be ready for anything they try. Priya nodded, understanding immediately. She had served with me long enough to know that my calm words never meant a lack of concern. They meant the opposite. They meant I had already accepted the danger and moved past worrying about it, into simply preparing for it. 3 days later, our ship was ready. It was called the Olive Branch, a name chosen deliberately. A name meant to project peaceful intentions to anyone watching our approach. On the surface, it looked exactly like what it claimed to be, an unarmed diplomatic vessel, carrying a small delegation toward a summit that might finally end the longest war humanity had ever fought. Underneath that surface, hidden behind false walls and quiet engineering, it carried something else entirely. As I stood in the observation deck the night before departure, looking out at the stars we would soon be traveling through, I thought about my grandfather, and the sky that had turned strange colors so many years ago. I thought about all the people who never got the chance to see this moment, who fought and died so that humanity might one day sit across a table from the Dominion as equals instead of victims. Whatever waited for us on Threshold Station, whatever plan the Dominion believed they had prepared, I intended to make sure of one simple truth before this was over. We were not the same primitive species they remembered from 20 years ago. We had learned, we had grown, and we were absolutely ready for whatever came next. Tomorrow, we would fly toward what looked like an offer of peace. And we would be ready, no matter what it truly turned out to be. The night before we left for Threshold Station, I could not stop thinking about the fine print of the treaty, not the words themselves, which had been written carefully by someone who understood exactly how to sound peaceful without promising very much. What kept pulling at my mind was everything the treaty did not say. I sat alone in the briefing room long after everyone else had gone to rest, surrounded by printouts and data slates covered in Dr. Renshaw's careful notes. He had spent 3 days pulling the treaty apart, sentence by sentence, the way a careful jeweler examines a gem for hidden cracks. I had asked him to walk me through his findings one final time before we departed, because I wanted every detail fresh in my mind when we arrived at the station. "Commander," he said, stepping into the room with a fresh set of documents. "I think I finally understand why this bothered me so much." "Tell me," I said. He spread 3 pages across the table in front of me. "Look at the language here. In the section about troop presence, the Dominion agrees to limit their military escort to a, quote, standard diplomatic guard, but nowhere in the entire document do they define what a standard diplomatic guard actually means. No numbers, no ship classes, no weapon limits, unquote." I frowned at the page. "That seems like a strange thing to leave out of a peace treaty." "It is not strange," Renshaw said. "It is deliberate. A treaty like this should protect both sides by making every term specific and measurable. Instead, this document is full of soft language, reasonable measures, appropriate presence, standard escort, words that sound official but promise nothing at all. So either their negotiators are inexperienced," I said slowly, "or they wrote it this way on purpose so they could claim they never broke any rule, no matter what they bring to that station." "Exactly," Renshaw said, "and knowing the Dominion, I do not believe for one moment that their negotiators are inexperienced." I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my eyes. 20 years of war teaches you to recognize patterns, even when you wish you couldn't. This pattern was becoming very clear. The Dominion had built themselves an agreement that looked like peace on the surface, while leaving every door open underneath it. "There is one more thing," Renshaw said, sliding a final page toward me. "This is a partial translation of internal Dominion communication traffic, our listening posts intercepted near the border 2 weeks ago. It is fragmented, and I want to be honest that we cannot confirm everything in it, but one phrase repeats 3 separate times across different transmissions." I looked down at the translated text. It was messy, filled with gaps where the translation software could not make sense of certain words, but one phrase stood out clearly enough. "Gather the wolves at the threshold." A chill moved through me, slow and quiet, the kind that does not show on your face but settles deep in your chest. Threshold was the name of the station, and wolves, in most translations we had gathered over the years of studying Dominion communication, was a term they used specifically for combat vessels prepared for a decisive strike. "They are gathering warships near the summit location," I said quietly. "That is my read as well," Renshaw said. "I want to stress again that this fragment is incomplete. It could mean many things, but given everything else we have found, I do not think it is a coincidence." I sat with that information for a long moment, letting it settle alongside everything else we had learned. The docking bays built for warships, the vague, undefined troop limits, the strange politeness of a species that had never once, in 400 years, needed to be polite. And now this, a fragment of a message that spoke of gathering wolves at the very place they had invited us to discuss peace. "Thank you, Doctor," I said finally. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day, and I suspect the days after it will be longer still." He nodded and gathered his papers, pausing at the door. "Commander, may I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you believe there is any chance, even a small one, that this really is genuine? That they truly want the war to end?" I thought about the question honestly before answering, because he deserved an honest answer, not a comforting one. "I believe it is possible," I said. "I have read enough of their supply reports and lost battle numbers to know they are hurting badly. Wars like this one do not end because one side suddenly becomes kind. They end because continuing to fight becomes more costly than stopping. It is very possible some part of the Dominion leadership genuinely wants this war to end. But I also believe that wanting peace and planning treachery are not opposite things inside the same government. Empires like the Dominion are not one single mind. They are many factions, many voices, all fighting for control of the same decisions. It is entirely possible that one faction sent us a genuine offer, while another faction plans to make sure that offer never survives its first meeting. Renshaw considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. That is a much more complicated answer than I expected. War is a complicated thing, I said. Anyone who tells you otherwise has never truly lived through one. He left me alone with my thoughts after that, and I spent another hour simply staring at the fragment of translated message. Gather the wolves at the threshold. Simple words, carrying the weight of everything we feared. The next morning I called a final meeting with the small team that would accompany me aboard the Olive Branch. There were 7 of us total who understood the full truth of our mission, beyond the official diplomatic cover story given to the wider fleet. Priya would serve as my aide during negotiations, just as she always did. Dr. Renshaw would join us as an intelligence advisor, continuing his careful analysis even as we traveled. And 5 soldiers, quiet and steady, chosen specifically for this mission, would remain hidden aboard the ship until the moment they were needed, if that moment ever came. Their leader was a woman named Captain Mara Illick, a soldier I had served alongside years earlier during one of the war's hardest campaigns. She was not a large woman, and she rarely raised her voice, but there was a stillness about her that made you trust her immediately in dangerous situations. She had a gift for staying calm exactly when everyone else around her began to panic. "Commander," she said, greeting me with a firm handshake as our team gathered in the ship's lower deck, away from prying eyes. "I hear we are attending a peace summit." "That is the official story," I said. "And unofficially?" "Unofficially, we are attending a peace summit, while being fully prepared for the possibility that it is not one." Mara smiled slightly, the kind of smile that held no humor in it, only readiness. "That sounds like most of the missions we've done together." "I am hoping this one goes differently," I said. "I would very much like to walk away from Threshold Station having accomplished nothing more exciting than a long, boring negotiation." "I will drink to that outcome," Mara said, "but I will also keep my team ready for the other one." I appreciated her honesty more than she probably realized. There is a particular comfort in working alongside people who do not pretend the danger away, who look directly at a difficult situation and simply prepare for it, without unnecessary fear or unnecessary bravado. We spent the following hours reviewing every detail of our plan, the hidden compartments beneath the ship's decking, where equipment and personnel could remain concealed from any scan the Dominion might attempt during our approach, the signal phrases we would use if negotiations needed to shift suddenly from words to action, the escape routes, the fallback positions, the small signals only our team would recognize as meaningful, hidden inside otherwise ordinary conversation. It felt strange, planning so carefully for violence, while also preparing genuine negotiation points, genuine terms we hoped to discuss if the Dominion truly meant what they had written. I found myself hoping, quietly and privately, that all of this preparation would prove unnecessary, that we would arrive at Threshold Station, sit across the table from Dominion representatives, and discover that peace was actually possible after 20 years of loss on both sides. But hope, I had learned long ago, is not a plan. It is simply the thing you carry with you while you build the plan that actually protects you. As evening approached and our departure time grew closer, I found myself standing once more at the observation deck, watching the last light fade outside the station where the Olive Branch waited for us. Priya joined me quietly, standing beside me without speaking for a long moment. "Do you think we are ready?" she finally asked. "As ready as we can be," I said. "We have studied their treaty. We have studied their patterns. We have brought everything we can hide beneath politeness and diplomatic language. Whatever waits for us out there, we will not be walking in blind. And if it truly is only a peace summit, if none of this preparation is needed," I smiled, though there was little humor in it, "then I will be the happiest soldier in this entire fleet, Priya. There is no version of tomorrow where I want to fight. I only want to be ready for one, in case it finds us anyway." She nodded, understanding completely, and together we watched the last light disappear beyond the station's horizon. Tomorrow, we would leave for Threshold Station. Tomorrow, we would learn whether the Dominion truly wanted an end to this long, costly war, or whether they had simply built a beautiful door leading straight into a trap. Either way, humanity would arrive prepared, not with anger, not with unnecessary aggression, but with the quiet, careful readiness of a species that had learned, through 20 hard years of loss and survival, that peace worth having is peace you are strong enough to protect. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of everything ahead settle fully across my shoulders, and then I turned away from the window and walked toward the ship that would carry us toward whatever waited next. The Olive Branch looked like exactly what it claimed to be, and that was precisely the point. I walked its main corridor early on the morning of our departure, running my hand along the smooth white walls, admiring how ordinary everything appeared. Soft lighting, Comfortable seating areas near the observation windows. A small dining hall designed to make visiting officials feel welcome rather than threatened. If you did not know better, you would think this ship had never been built with anything but conversation in mind. That was exactly what our engineers had wanted the Dominion to believe. Chief Engineer Tomasz Kovac met me near the entrance to the lower deck, holding a data slate close to his chest like it contained something precious, which in a way, it did. He was a heavy-set man with tired eyes and permanently ink-stained fingers, the kind of person who cared more about solving a difficult problem than about receiving credit for solving it. "Commander," he said, "would you like the full tour or the short version?" "Give me the full version," I said. "I want to understand every part of this ship before we arrive somewhere I cannot easily ask questions." He nodded and led me toward a section of decking near the ship's midsection, an area that looked, on the surface, like ordinary storage space for diplomatic supplies. He knelt down, pressed a sequence of panels in a very specific order, and a section of the floor slid open silently, revealing a narrow stairway leading downward. "This entire lower level does not appear on any external scan," Fermas explained as we descended. "We built it using a layered hull design, similar to techniques we developed after studying captured Dominion technology years ago. To any sensor sweep, this space simply reads as solid structural support. It took our team almost 8 months to get the shielding correct." We reached the bottom of the stairway, and I found myself standing in a compact but efficient space, filled with equipment I recognized immediately from my years in active combat. Storage racks held gear for 5 soldiers, everything neatly organized and secured for transport. A small medical station sat tucked into one corner, stocked with supplies for emergencies, and along the far wall, covered by a simple gray tarp, sat something I had been waiting to see with my own eyes since authorizing its construction 3 weeks earlier. Tomasz walked over and pulled the tarp away with a small note of pride in his expression. "This is what we have been working toward," he said. The device in front of me did not look particularly impressive at first glance. It was roughly the size of a large equipment case, dark metal casing, a few status lights along one edge, nothing that would draw attention if seen briefly, but I knew what it represented, and that knowledge carried far more weight than its appearance suggested. "Talk me through it," I said. "I want to understand exactly what we are bringing with us." "Do you remember the Dominion vessel our forces captured near the outer colonies 6 years ago?" Tomasz asked. "I remember it well," I said. "It was the first time we managed to bring one of their ships back, mostly intact." "Our research team spent years studying its systems," Tomasz continued. "Much of what we found, we could not use directly. Dominion technology relies on certain materials and energy patterns that do not translate well into our existing systems. But there was one component, a short-range disruption emitter, that caught our attention early on. In their ships, it served a fairly narrow function, mostly used to interfere with enemy communication during close engagements." "And you improved it," I said. Tomasz smiled slightly. "We did more than improve it, Commander. We expanded its function entirely. What began as a communication disruptor is now something closer to a short-range disabling field, capable of temporarily interrupting weapon systems, shield generators, and propulsion controls within a limited radius. It is not a weapon in the traditional sense. It does not destroy anything, but for a short window of time it can make an enemy vessel's systems completely unreliable." I studied the device more closely, understanding immediately why this mattered so much for our mission. If the Dominion truly planned to spring a trap around us, having even a brief window where their surrounding ships could not reliably fire, navigate, or communicate might be the exact difference between disaster and survival. "How long is the window?" I asked. "Approximately 90 seconds at full effectiveness," Tomasz said. "After that, their systems begin recovering. Faster the further you move from the epicenter. It is not a permanent solution. It is a chance. 90 seconds to create distance, to reposition, to change the entire shape of a dangerous situation before it becomes something none of us can walk away from." 90 seconds. It did not sound like much time, stated out loud in a quiet room, but I had spent enough years in combat to understand exactly how much could happen in 90 seconds when the right people used them well. "Good work," I told him, and I meant it completely. "I hope we never need to use this, but I am very glad it exists." "That is usually how the best tools work," Tomasz said. "You build them hoping you never have a reason to." We continued through the lower deck, and he showed me the remaining details of our hidden preparations. A small secondary communication array, separate from the ship's main system, allowing us to send signals even if our primary systems were somehow compromised. Reinforced sections along key structural points, strengthening the ship's ability to withstand sudden impacts without revealing themselves as anything other than standard hull plating. And finally, near the very back of the lower deck, a compact set of shuttle pods, small enough to remain completely hidden, but capable of quickly evacuating our team if the situation truly turned against us. "You have thought of almost everything," I said, genuinely impressed. "Almost," Tomas said. "There is no such thing as thinking of everything, Commander. There is only thinking of enough things to give yourself a fighting chance, and trusting good people to handle whatever you missed." I appreciated his honesty. It matched exactly how I felt about the entire mission ahead of us. After finishing the tour of the lower deck, I made my way to the small briefing room near the ship's center, where Captain Mara Illick waited with the 4 soldiers who would serve alongside her during this mission. They stood as I entered, and I gestured for them to remain relaxed. This was not a moment for formal ceremony. It was a moment for honest preparation. "I want each of you to understand something clearly," I said, looking around the room at their faces. "Officially, this is a diplomatic mission. You will remain hidden throughout our approach and throughout the early stages of negotiation. My hope, my genuine hope, is that you remain hidden the entire time, and that we return home having accomplished nothing more dramatic than a very long, very boring series of meetings." A few quiet smiles appeared around the room at that. "But," I continued, "we have strong reason to believe the Dominion may attempt something during this summit. If that happens, I will need each of you ready to act immediately, precisely, and without hesitation. Our goal, should the worst occur, is not aggression for its own sake. Our goal is protection, protecting this delegation, protecting the information we carry, and ensuring that whatever the Dominion attempts here, it costs them far more than they expect." Mara nodded firmly. "Understood, Commander. My team is ready." "I know you are," I said. "I would not have chosen anyone else for this mission." We spent the remaining hours before departure running through final preparations. Communication codes were memorized and rehearsed until they became second nature. Escape routes through the ship's corridors were walked and reviewed multiple times, ensuring every member of our hidden team understood exactly how to move quickly if circumstances required it. Dr. Renshaw continued monitoring incoming intelligence reports, watching for any final signs that might reveal more about what truly waited for us at Threshold Station. As departure time finally approached, I stood alone for a few quiet minutes in my private quarters aboard the Olive Branch, looking at a small photograph I kept from years earlier, taken shortly after one of the war's earliest and most difficult battles. It showed a group of young soldiers, myself included, standing together in the aftermath of a fight none of us had been certain we would survive. Most of the faces in that photograph were gone now, lost to the long years of war that followed. I kept it not out of sadness, though sadness was certainly part of it, but out of gratitude. Gratitude for every lesson those years had taught me, lessons I now carried into this new, uncertain moment. A soft chime sounded through the ship, signaling final departure preparations. I set the photograph down carefully, straightened my uniform, and made my way toward the command deck, where Priya and the rest of our visible delegation waited. "Ready, Commander?" Priya asked as I entered. "As ready as 20 years of careful preparation can make a person," I said. The Olive Branch detached from its docking clamp a few minutes later, engines humming quietly as we began our long journey toward Threshold Station. I stood near the main viewport, watching the familiar shapes of our home fleet slowly shrink behind us, replaced gradually by the endless dark stretch of open space ahead. Somewhere out there, hidden among the stars, the Dominion waited with a treaty in one hand and, if our fears proved correct, something far more dangerous held carefully behind their back. We were flying directly toward whatever they had planned. But we were not flying there unprepared, and we were certainly not flying there alone in spirit. Behind every quiet, careful preparation aboard this ship stood 20 years of hard-won lessons, paid for by people who never had the chance to see this moment arrive. Whatever waited for us at Threshold Station, I intended to make sure their sacrifice had not been made in vain. Threshold Station appeared on our sensors 2 days into our journey, first as a faint point of light against the darkness, then slowly growing into something enormous and unfamiliar. I had studied the schematics for weeks, memorized every measurement Dr. Renshaw had questioned, yet nothing quite prepared me for seeing the real structure with my own eyes. It was larger than I expected, much larger. A series of connected rings surrounded a central spire, the whole structure slowly rotating against the black backdrop of space, catching distant starlight along its metal surfaces. Small lights blinked steadily along its outer hull, marking docking points, sensor arrays, and what I suspected were defense systems disguised as ordinary station infrastructure. "It's beautiful," Priya said quietly, standing beside me at the main viewport. "It is," I agreed. "That does not make it safe." She glanced at me, understanding the point immediately. Beautiful things could still hide danger. Sometimes danger hid best inside beauty, precisely because people struggled to imagine something so impressive concealing something so ugly. Our communication officer, a steady young man named Adebayo, announced that Dominion Traffic Control had made contact, requesting our approach vector and docking assignment. I nodded for him to proceed with the standard diplomatic exchange, watching carefully as our ship adjusted course toward the station's designated civilian docking ring. "Commander," Adebayo said a few minutes later. "Docking assignment confirmed. Bay 7, Outer Ring." I glanced at Renshaw, who had joined us on the command deck. "Outer Ring," I said. "That matches the coordinates in the treaty documents." "It does," he confirmed. "For whatever reassurance that provides." It provided some reassurance, though not enough to fully calm the quiet tension sitting in my chest. As we drew closer, I could see other vessels already docked along the station's various rings, a mixture of ship designs I did not immediately recognize. Some appeared civilian in nature, likely representatives from smaller species who had come to observe this historic moment. Others, positioned further along the ring, carried the unmistakable angular design of Dominion military vessels, present in numbers that felt slightly higher than what a simple diplomatic escort would require. I said nothing about this observation aloud, but I noted it carefully, adding it to the growing list of small details that did not quite match the peaceful language of the treaty we had traveled here to discuss. Our approach continued smoothly, and within the hour, the olive branch settled gently into its assigned docking bay, mechanical clamps securing our ship in place with a soft, distant clunk that echoed through the hull. I took a slow breath, steadying myself before standing from my chair. "Priya, Dr. Renshaw," I said, "with me. Everyone else, remain at your stations and maintain standard readiness." Mara Illich caught my eye briefly from the corridor entrance leading down to the hidden lower deck. She said nothing, only offered a small, steady nod, confirming she and her team understood their role for this stage of the mission. "Remain hidden, remain ready, wait for the signal should it ever come." I nodded back, then turned and made my way toward the airlock with Priya and Renshaw close behind me. The airlock door opened with a quiet hiss, revealing a wide reception corridor beyond, elegantly designed with soft lighting and smooth metallic walls that curved gently upward toward a high ceiling. Waiting for us stood a small group of Dominion representatives, along with a floating translator drone hovering silently beside them. The lead representative stepped forward, and I studied him carefully as he approached. The Chrysothi were tall, considerably taller than the average human, with elongated limbs and smooth gray skin that shifted slightly in tone depending on the lighting around them. Their faces carried expressions that were difficult for humans to read naturally, though years of contact had taught our diplomats and soldiers alike to notice certain subtle signs, small movements around their wide, dark eyes that hinted at emotion beneath their otherwise calm exteriors. "Commander Voss," the representative said, his voice translated a half-second later through the drone hovering nearby. "I am Ambassador Threll, senior negotiator for the Chrysothi Dominion. It is an honor to welcome you to Threshold Station." "Ambassador Threll," I replied, offering a respectful nod. "Thank you for the invitation. I hope our time here proves productive for both our peoples." "As do I," Threll said, and something in his tone struck me immediately as unusual. Too smooth, too practiced. In 20 years of war, I had encountered exactly 0 moments of genuine warmth from Dominion representatives, and I found myself instinctively distrustful of receiving so much of it now, delivered so effortlessly. Threll gestured for us to follow him deeper into the station, and as we walked I allowed myself to study our surroundings carefully, cataloging details the way years of training had taught me to do almost without conscious thought. The corridor branched into several paths further ahead, more than would typically be necessary for a station built solely around one central meeting hall. Small alcoves along the walls held what appeared to be decorative statues, though something about their placement, evenly spaced and positioned at clear sightlines down each corridor, suggested they might serve additional purposes beyond simple decoration. I counted 4 Dominion guards positioned at the first junction we passed, standing at rigid attention, their postures carrying the unmistakable discipline of trained soldiers rather than simple ceremonial guards. Their weapons, holstered but visible, were standard Dominion sidearms, nothing unusual for station security. Still, I noted their positions carefully, along with the layout of the corridor itself, filing away potential exit routes should circumstances ever require us to move quickly. "You seem thoughtful, Commander," Threll said, glancing back at me as we walked. "Is something troubling you?" I offered a small, polite smile, simply taking in the impressive scale of your station, Ambassador. It is larger than I expected. Threshold Station was built specifically for this summit, Threll explained. We wish to provide a location worthy of such an important moment in the history of both our peoples. That is generous of the Dominion, Renshaw said smoothly from beside me, and I caught the subtle edge hidden within his polite tone, an edge I doubted Threll's translator drone was capable of fully capturing. We continued walking, passing through a wide central chamber that opened into what I assumed would serve as our primary negotiation hall. Large windows lined one curved wall, offering a sweeping view of the stars outside, along with a partial view of several Dominion vessels positioned along the nearby docking rings. I noted the number carefully. 6 vessels visible from this angle alone, more than double what I would have expected from a summit built around careful, controlled negotiation. Threll noticed my gaze lingering on the window and offered an explanation before I even asked. You may notice additional security presence outside, Commander. I hope this does not cause concern. Given the historic and sensitive nature of these negotiations, our leadership insisted on additional protective measures for the station itself. Of course, I said evenly. Security is a reasonable precaution for both our peoples, given the circumstances. Precisely my thoughts as well, Threll said, seeming pleased by my response. I said nothing further on the matter, though internally, I filed away every detail of his explanation alongside everything Renshaw's analysis had already uncovered. Additional protective measures, standard diplomatic guard, left conveniently undefined within the treaty's language, docking bays sized for warships rather than shuttles, gather the wolves at the threshold. Piece by piece, the picture continued forming clearly in my mind, even as Ambassador Threll continued speaking warmly about the historic opportunity our meeting represented for lasting peace between our species. We were led eventually to a smaller meeting room adjacent to the main negotiation hall, where Threll explained that initial introductions and preliminary discussions would begin the following morning, allowing our delegation time to rest after our journey. I thanked him for his consideration, though I privately suspected the delay served additional purposes beyond simple hospitality, perhaps allowing further preparations to continue outside our observation. As Threll and his aides departed, leaving us temporarily alone within our assigned quarters, Priya turned to me immediately, her earlier calm expression replaced by clear concern. 6 ships, she said quietly. Did you count them as well? I did, I confirmed. And I doubt that window offered us the complete number. Renshaw moved quickly toward a small case he had carried with him, retrieving a compact scanning device disguised among ordinary diplomatic equipment. Give me a few minutes, he said. I want to run a passive sensor sweep before we discuss anything further. If this room has been prepared for listening, I would rather know before we say something we cannot take back. We waited quietly while he worked, and after several tense minutes, he finally nodded, indicating the room appeared clear of obvious surveillance devices, at least the kind his equipment could detect. All right, I said, keeping my voice low despite his reassurance. Let us assume nothing here is entirely as it appears. Threll's warmth, the additional ships, the convenient delay before negotiations begin. Every piece continues fitting the same pattern we suspected before we ever left home. Agreed, Renshaw said, though I want to stress, once again, that suspicion is not certainty. We have strong reason to believe something is wrong here. We do not yet have proof of exactly what. Then we proceed carefully, I said. We attend tomorrow's opening session exactly as planned. We remain polite, patient, and observant, and we continue watching for whatever additional evidence might reveal their true intentions before this summit reaches whatever conclusion they have planned for it. Priya nodded slowly, though I could see the tension still lingering behind her eyes. And if they act before we find that proof? I thought of Mara Illick and her team, waiting quietly aboard the olive branch, ready to act the moment circumstances required it. I thought of the disabling device resting carefully in our ship's hidden lower deck, built specifically for a moment, just like the one we now feared might be approaching. Then we will already be ready, I said quietly. Whatever Threshold Station truly holds beneath its beautiful surface, we did not travel here unprepared to face it. Outside our window, the stars continued their slow, silent rotation, indifferent to the careful, dangerous game now unfolding aboard the station beneath them. Tomorrow, formal negotiations would begin. Tomorrow we would sit across from Ambassador Threll and continue the delicate dance of polite words and hidden intentions that had brought humanity this far already. I only hoped we would recognize the true moment of danger clearly enough, and quickly enough, when it finally arrived. Morning aboard Threshold Station did not look like morning at all. There was no sunrise, no gradual light spreading across the sky, only the soft, artificial brightening of corridor lighting that told us the station's internal clock had marked the start of a new day. Still, After a night of restless sleep, I found myself grateful for any signal that the waiting was finally over. Ambassador Threll met us outside our quarters precisely on schedule, his expression carrying the same warm politeness from the day before. "Commander Voss," he said, "I trust you rested well?" "Well enough," I said, which was mostly true. I had slept in short pieces, waking often to review details in my mind, but I saw no reason to share that with him. He led us toward the main negotiation hall, the same wide chamber we had passed through briefly the previous day. Today, it had been arranged properly for formal discussion. A long curved table positioned near the center, chairs suited to both human and Krizathi anatomy, placed carefully along either side. Several additional Dominion officials waited near the far end, along with 2 representatives from smaller allied species I recognized from previous diplomatic gatherings, present here as neutral observers to this historic meeting. I took my seat, Priya settling in beside me, Renshaw positioned slightly further down the table, close enough to follow the discussion carefully while appearing to focus mainly on his notes. Threll took his position across from me, folding his long hands together atop the table's smooth surface. "Shall we begin?" he asked. "Please," I said. The opening hours passed in careful, formal discussion, the kind of slow, deliberate exchange I had expected from a summit of this magnitude. We reviewed proposed ceasefire terms along contested border regions. We discussed possible frameworks for prisoner exchanges, a topic that had remained unresolved for years and carried deep personal weight for many families on both sides of this long war. Threll spoke smoothly throughout, offering concessions that, on the surface, seemed genuinely meaningful. I found myself, despite every warning sign we had gathered, allowing a small, cautious hope to settle into my chest. Perhaps Renshaw's fears, and my own, had been built from caution rather than actual danger. Perhaps some faction within the Dominion truly did want this war to end, and the strange details we had noticed were simply the awkward result of an unfamiliar process, rather than evidence of hidden treachery. That cautious hope lasted until the midpoint of our session, when Threll excused himself briefly, citing a need to consult privately with his advisors regarding one particular border proposal. It was a reasonable request, the kind of pause common in negotiations of this complexity. I nodded, granting a short recess, and used the moment to stretch my legs near the chamber's wide viewing window, looking out at the stars and the distant shapes of Dominion vessels positioned along the station's rings. It was during this brief recess that Priya approached me quietly, her expression carefully controlled, though I noticed immediately the tension held tightly behind her calm exterior. "Commander," she said softly, keeping her voice low enough that only I could hear her clearly. "Adebayo just reached me through our secondary channel. He wants you to review something immediately." I kept my expression neutral, aware that Dominion observers remained present throughout the chamber, though positioned far enough away that our quiet conversation should remain private. "What is it?" "He says it cannot wait," Priya said. "He asked that you return to the ship briefly, using the excuse of checking on delegation supplies." I understood immediately that something important had happened, something serious enough that Adebayo, normally calm and unhurried in his communications, felt the need to interrupt an active negotiation session. I excused myself politely to the nearest Dominion aide, explaining a minor logistical matter required my attention aboard our ship, and made my way quickly back toward the docking bay, Priya close behind me. Adebayo met us the moment we boarded the Olive Branch, his usually steady expression replaced by something closer to controlled alarm. "Commander," he said immediately, "I need you to hear this." He led us quickly to the communication station, where a recorded audio fragment sat prepared for playback. "Our passive sensors picked up unencrypted Dominion fleet chatter approximately 20 minutes ago," he explained. "Most of their military communication runs through heavily encrypted channels as expected, but this particular transmission came through an older frequency band, one their forces have used historically for short-range coordination between vessels operating in close formation." "Why would that transmission be unencrypted?" Renshaw asked, having joined us quickly from the negotiation hall. "I believe it was a mistake," Adebayo said. "A frequency error. Perhaps a rushed coordination attempt between ships that failed to properly secure the channel first. Whatever the reason, we captured it clearly." He played the recording. The translation software struggled slightly with certain terms, producing gaps and uncertain phrasing throughout, but the core message came through with disturbing clarity. Multiple Dominion vessels, referred to using fleet designations I did not immediately recognize, confirming their positions along a coordinated perimeter surrounding Threshold Station. A separate voice, clearly issuing instructions, confirming that all assigned vessels needed to remain in position and ready, awaiting what the recording translated roughly as the signal moment. The recording ended, leaving silence hanging heavily in the room. "They are positioning a blockade around this station," I said quietly, though saying the words aloud did little to soften the weight of them. "That is my assessment as well," Adebayo confirmed. "Based on the fragments of coordinates mentioned throughout this transmission, along with the vessel positions we have already tracked visually from our docking bay, I believe there are considerably more Dominion warships in this system than what we observed yesterday, possibly a complete blockade formation, positioned to prevent any vessel from leaving this station undetected." I closed my eyes for a brief moment, letting the full weight of the situation settle clearly in my mind. Everything we had suspected, every small detail Renshaw had uncovered within the treaty's careful language, every strange moment of warmth from Ambassador Threll that never quite matched 20 years of hostile history between our species, all of it converged now into this single, undeniable piece of evidence. This was never truly a summit built around ending the war. This was a trap, built carefully around the appearance of peace, designed specifically to gather humanity's most valuable military and political leadership into one contained location, surrounded quietly by overwhelming force, waiting only for the right moment to close completely. "What do we do?" Priya asked, her voice steady despite the clear tension beneath it. I opened my eyes and looked around at the small group gathered with me aboard the Olive Branch, people I trusted completely, with decisions that would soon carry consequences far beyond this single room. "We have two choices in front of us," I said slowly, thinking through each carefully as I spoke. "We could confront Ambassador Threll directly, present this evidence, and demand honest answers regarding the fleet positioned around this station. And risk revealing exactly how much we already know," Renshaw said, "before we fully understand their complete plan or their true timeline." "Exactly," I said. "Confronting them now might force their hand earlier than they intend, before we have gathered everything we need to protect ourselves properly, and before we fully understand which faction within the Dominion truly controls this operation." "And the second choice?" Priya asked. "We continue exactly as we have been," I said. "We return to the negotiation table. We remain calm, patient, and outwardly unaware of what we have discovered. We allow their plan to continue unfolding naturally, while we quietly prepare our own response, ready to act the precise moment their true intentions become undeniable." Renshaw considered this carefully. "That is considerably more dangerous, Commander. It means walking directly back into that room, sitting across from Threll, knowing what we now know, without revealing anything through our expression or our words." "It is dangerous," I agreed, "but it also gives us the advantage of controlling the moment this confrontation truly begins, rather than allowing the Dominion to control it entirely. If we reveal our knowledge now, we lose whatever element of surprise we still hold. If we wait, watching carefully for the true signal of their plan, we choose exactly when and how this moment unfolds." I looked toward the hidden stairway leading down to our lower deck, where Mara Illich and her team remained quietly ready, prepared for exactly this kind of moment. "Adebayo," I said, "continue monitoring every frequency available to us, encrypted or otherwise. I want to know the instant anything changes regarding those fleet positions." "Understood, Commander." "Priya, Dr. Renshaw," I continued. We returned to the negotiation table exactly as planned. We continue discussing ceasefire terms and prisoner exchanges precisely as though nothing has changed. Whatever Threll and his advisors are truly planning, we will not give them any reason to believe we suspect it before we are fully ready to respond. Priya nodded, steadying herself visibly before speaking. "And if they attempt something during the session itself?" I thought of the signal phrase we had rehearsed carefully during our journey here. A simple, innocent-sounding sentence that would instantly alert Mara's team, hidden quietly beneath the ship's decking, that the moment for action had finally arrived. "Then we will be ready," I said, exactly as we prepared to be. We made our way back toward the negotiation hall a few minutes later, moving with the same calm, measured pace we had used throughout our entire visit to this station. Ambassador Threll greeted us warmly as we returned, apparently unaware that anything had changed during our brief absence. "I hope everything aboard your vessel was in order," he said. "Perfectly in order, Ambassador," I said, matching his warmth with my own carefully practiced calm. "Shall we continue our discussion?" "Of course," Threll said, gesturing toward our seats. I sat down across from him once more, folding my hands calmly atop the table, giving no outward sign of the knowledge now settled heavily within me. Somewhere outside this station, hidden among the surrounding stars, an entire fleet of Dominion warships waited quietly for a signal none of us had yet heard spoken aloud. But I understood now, with absolute clarity, exactly what that signal would eventually bring. And when it finally arrived, Humanity would not be caught unprepared. The rest of that day passed in careful, deliberate calm, though I do not think I have ever worked harder to appear relaxed while feeling anything but. We continued discussing ceasefire terms with Ambassador Threll and his advisors, moving through prisoner exchange frameworks and border adjustment proposals, with the same careful patience we had shown since our arrival. Every polite word I spoke carried a strange weight now, knowing what waited quietly beyond the station's walls. That evening, Adebayo's monitoring finally produced the confirmation I had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. I was reviewing final notes from the day's session in my quarters when Priya arrived, her expression tight with controlled urgency. "Commander," she said, "Adebayo needs you immediately. He says the fleet positions have changed." I followed her quickly back toward the olive branch, my heart steady but my mind moving rapidly through every contingency we had prepared. Adebayo met us at the communication station, gesturing toward a display showing updated sensor readings. 20 minutes ago, 3 additional Dominion vessels moved into new positions, he explained. Combined with everything we tracked earlier, our best estimate now places a complete blockade formation around this entire station, covering every possible departure vector. "They are closing the door," Renshaw said quietly, arriving just behind us. "That is my assessment," Adebayo confirmed. "I also intercepted a fragment of encrypted traffic our systems partially decoded, based on patterns similar to messages we studied earlier in the war. The translation remains incomplete, but one phrase came through clearly enough. Final preparations complete." I felt the weight of that phrase settle firmly across my shoulders. Whatever the Dominion had planned for this summit, whatever moment they had been waiting for, that moment had clearly arrived, or was arriving very soon. "How long do we have?" I asked. "I cannot say with certainty," Adebayo admitted. "Based on typical Dominion military patterns, I would estimate they intend to act either very late tonight or early tomorrow morning, likely during a moment when they expect our guard to be lowest." I thought quickly through our options, weighing every piece of information we had gathered since arriving at this station. Waiting longer, hoping to gather additional proof, risked losing whatever advantage our preparation had given us. Acting too early risked revealing our knowledge before we fully understood the complete shape of their plan. But delay, I realized clearly, was no longer the safer choice. Every additional hour we waited only gave the Dominion more time to finalize whatever they intended to do. "Priya," I said, "contact Ambassador Threll. Tell him I wish to request an early session tomorrow morning, citing a desire to move quickly toward finalizing our agreement. I want to control exactly when we return to that negotiation hall, rather than waiting for them to summon us on their own schedule." "Understood, Commander." "Adebayo, continue monitoring every available frequency throughout the night. Renshaw, I want you reviewing every piece of intelligence we have gathered since our arrival, searching for anything that might reveal their intended method, whether they plan a direct assault on this station or something else entirely." I made my way down to the hidden lower deck a few minutes later, finding Mara Illick and her team already alert, having sensed the shift in mood aboard the ship even before I arrived to confirm it directly. "Commander," Mara said, standing as I approached, "I take it tomorrow is the day." "I believe so," I said. "Adebayo estimates the Dominion intends to act sometime within the next 24 hours. I want your team fully prepared before we return to that negotiation hall in the morning." Mara nodded firmly, gesturing for her soldiers to begin their final preparations. I watched them work with quiet efficiency, checking equipment, reviewing plans we had rehearsed countless times during our journey here, each movement precise and purposeful rather than rushed or anxious. "I have one additional request," I said to Mara, once her team had settled into their preparations. "I want your team ready to move the moment I give the signal phrase, but I do not want any action taken before that signal, regardless of what happens during tomorrow's session. I need to control exactly when this situation shifts from negotiation to something else." "Understood completely," Mara said. "We will not move until you give the word, Commander. Whatever they attempt, we will let you set the moment." I appreciated her discipline more than I could easily express. 20 years of war had taught both of us that timing mattered as much as courage, perhaps more. That night passed slowly, filled with quiet preparation rather than rest. I reviewed every detail of our plan repeatedly, along with Renshaw's final intelligence summary, searching for any remaining gap in our understanding. By the time morning finally arrived, I felt as ready as circumstances allowed, though a familiar tension remained settled firmly in my chest, the same tension I remembered from the earliest days of the war, when every battle carried genuine uncertainty about its outcome. Ambassador Threll greeted us that morning with his usual warm politeness, seemingly pleased by our request for an early session. "Commander Voss," he said, "I appreciate your eagerness to move our discussions forward. Shall we begin? Please, I said, taking my seat across from him, Priya settling beside me, Renshaw positioned further down the table exactly as before. The session began normally enough, continuing discussions from the previous day regarding prisoner exchange logistics. I participated fully, offering genuine proposals, listening carefully to Threll's responses, maintaining every outward appearance of a delegation focused entirely on achieving lasting peace. Approximately 40 minutes into our session, Adebayo's voice came through my earpiece, carefully disguised among the ordinary equipment worn by diplomatic staff. "Commander," he said quietly, "I am detecting significant power fluctuations across multiple Dominion vessels surrounding the station. Their weapon systems appear to be charging." I kept my expression carefully neutral, continuing to nod along with whatever point Threll was currently making, while processing this new information rapidly beneath my calm exterior. "Understood," I murmured quietly enough that only my earpiece would pick up the response. A few minutes later, Adebayo spoke again. "Commander, station security personnel are repositioning throughout the negotiation halls surrounding corridors. Additional Dominion guards have moved into position near every exit point we identified during our arrival." This was the moment, I realized clearly. Whatever the Dominion had planned, it was beginning now, quietly and carefully, exactly as we had feared it might. I glanced briefly at Priya, catching her eye for only a fraction of a second, enough to convey silently that the moment we had prepared for had finally arrived. She gave the smallest, nearly invisible nod in return, understanding immediately. Threll continued speaking, discussing some minor adjustment to the prisoner exchange proposal, apparently unaware that I had already recognized the shifting situation surrounding us. I waited, carefully choosing my moment, until a natural pause arrived within our conversation. "Ambassador Threll," I said calmly, "before we continue, I would like to discuss the current fleet positions surrounding this station." Something shifted subtly across his expression, the first genuine crack I had seen in his carefully practiced warmth since our arrival. "Commander? I believe we both understand," I continued, keeping my voice steady and calm, "that this summit has never truly been about the terms we have spent 2 days discussing." Threll's advisors shifted uncomfortably around the table, and I noticed several of them glancing toward the chamber's exits. Exactly the reaction I had expected from people whose careful plan had suddenly been recognized before it could fully unfold. "I do not understand your meaning, Commander," Threll said, though his tone had lost much of its earlier warmth. "I think you understand perfectly well," I said. "Gather the wolves at the threshold." That phrase meant something specific, did it not? The chamber fell completely silent. Threll's expression hardened, the careful diplomatic mask finally beginning to slip away entirely, revealing something colder and far more familiar underneath. The same cold calculation I remembered from 20 years of battlefield encounters with the Dominion. "You were never meant to discover that," Threll said quietly. "And yet, here we are," I said, "discovering it anyway." I spoke a simple phrase then, one carefully chosen for its ordinary sound, a phrase that would mean nothing to anyone listening except for the small, trusted team waiting quietly aboard the olive branch. "I believe our discussions have reached their natural conclusion." Within moments, the entire station shifted around us. Alarms began sounding softly through hidden speakers, and I understood immediately that Mara's team had begun moving exactly as planned, securing key positions throughout the station with the same calm precision they had shown during every rehearsal aboard our ship. Simultaneously, external sensors aboard the olive branch, monitored constantly by Adebayo, would now be transmitting a coordinated signal outward, alerting the larger human fleet positioned carefully at the edge of this system, ready to respond the moment their assistance became necessary. Threll rose quickly from his seat, his advisors doing the same, clearly alarmed by the sudden shift unfolding around them. "Commander Voss," he said, his voice carrying an edge of genuine surprise. "What have you done?" "Exactly what your own people taught me to expect, Ambassador," I said, rising calmly from my own seat, meeting his gaze directly. "You built a beautiful door, and called it an invitation to peace. We simply made certain we were never truly standing on the wrong side of it." Around the chamber, Dominion security personnel moved quickly toward the exits, clearly attempting to regain control of a situation rapidly slipping away from their careful plan. But Mara's team had already secured every position we identified during our initial arrival, moving with the calm, practiced efficiency of soldiers who had spent years preparing for exactly this kind of moment. Whatever Ambassador Threll and his hidden fleet had truly intended for this summit, their carefully constructed trap had just been turned firmly back against them. And humanity, exactly as I had promised myself during that quiet night before our departure, had arrived fully prepared for whatever came next. The moment my signal phrase left my lips, Threshold Station transformed from a quiet diplomatic setting into something far more dangerous, and everything that followed happened faster than I could have imagined during even our most careful rehearsals. Mara Illick's team moved first, exactly as planned. I learned the details afterward, pieced together from her own report and the recordings captured by our equipment. But even secondhand, the precision of those first few minutes left me deeply proud of the people I had chosen to bring on this mission. 3 members of Mara's team had positioned themselves earlier that morning near the station's central security hub, disguised as ordinary delegation support staff carrying equipment cases through the corridors. The moment my signal reached them through their hidden earpieces, they moved with calm, practiced efficiency, using the same disabling technology Tomash had shown me weeks earlier aboard the Olive Branch. Within seconds, the station's primary security network, along with several nearby weapon emplacements, found their systems completely unresponsive, caught within the brief window our engineers had built specifically for this purpose. Meanwhile, back within the negotiation chamber itself, the situation had shifted from careful diplomacy into something closer to a tense standoff. Ambassador Threll's advisors had risen quickly from their seats, several reaching for concealed communication devices, likely attempting to alert their forces stationed elsewhere throughout the station. I watched their expressions shift from confidence to genuine alarm as their devices returned nothing but static, caught within the same disabling field affecting the station's broader security systems. "Commander," Priya said quietly beside me, her hand resting lightly near the small transmitter hidden within her diplomatic attire. "Our fleet has received the signal. They are moving into position now." I nodded, keeping my attention fixed carefully on Ambassador Threll, whose expression had settled into something colder and more guarded than the warm diplomat we had met upon our arrival 2 days earlier. "You cannot possibly believe this changes anything," Threll said, his translated voice carrying a sharp edge that had not been present during our earlier conversations. "You are surrounded by an entire fleet, Commander. Whatever small tricks your engineers have prepared will not matter once our full forces respond." "Perhaps," I said calmly, "or perhaps you have simply never faced an enemy who prepared as carefully as you did, Ambassador." Outside the station, exactly as Adebayo had predicted, the Dominion's surrounding fleet began responding to the sudden disruption spreading through their coordinated systems. I could not see the details from within the negotiation chamber, but I later learned that our own fleet, hidden carefully at the edge of the system for the past 2 days, emerged from their concealed positions the moment they received our signal, moving swiftly to intercept the confusion now spreading among the Dominion's blockade formation. Within the station itself, Mara's team continued their careful work, moving methodically through corridors we had studied extensively during our arrival, securing key positions one by one. Their approach relied heavily on precision rather than aggression, using specialized equipment designed to temporarily incapacitate rather than cause lasting harm, understanding clearly that our goal was control of the situation, not needless conflict with soldiers who were, in many cases, simply following orders from commanders far above them. I remained within the negotiation chamber throughout this unfolding situation, watching carefully as Ambassador Threll's confidence continued eroding with each passing minute. Whatever timeline he and his advisors had originally planned for this summit's true purpose, our early action had clearly disrupted it significantly, forcing his forces to respond reactively, rather than according to whatever careful plan they had originally prepared. "Your soldiers are moving through my station," Threll said eventually, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "This is a clear violation of diplomatic protocol, Commander." "As was gathering an entire fleet around a station you called neutral ground," I replied evenly. "I believe we are simply even, Ambassador." A soft chime sounded through my earpiece, and I recognized Mara's voice immediately. "Commander, security hub secured. Primary station systems now under our team's control, awaiting further instruction." "Understood," I said quietly, before turning my attention back to Threll. "It appears your station's security network now answers to different hands, Ambassador. I would suggest instructing your remaining forces to stand down, before this situation escalates any further than necessary." Threll studied me carefully for a long moment, clearly weighing his remaining options. I could see the calculation happening behind his dark eyes, the same careful weighing of costs and consequences that had likely driven every decision throughout this entire elaborate plan. "You believe you have won something here," he said finally, "but you do not understand the scale of what surrounds this station, Commander. Even with your fleet's assistance, you cannot possibly hold against our full forces." "Perhaps not indefinitely," I said. "But I do not need to hold against your full forces forever, Ambassador. I only need to hold long enough for the truth of this situation to become undeniable, not just to my own people, but to every world watching how this summit unfolds. Outside the station, the confrontation between our fleet and the Dominion's blockade formation continued unfolding, though thankfully with considerably less direct engagement than either side had likely anticipated. Our forces, having studied Dominion tactics extensively over 20 years of conflict, focused primarily on disabling key vessels within the blockade, rather than pursuing aggressive engagement, using tactics and technology specifically designed to create confusion and disorder rather than lasting destruction. I learned later that our disabling technology, the same devices Tomasz had shown me weeks earlier, played a critical role during this confrontation as well, deployed carefully by several of our escort vessels to disrupt key systems across multiple Dominion warships simultaneously. This brief window of confusion allowed our fleet to reposition strategically, separating individual Dominion vessels from their coordinated formation, reducing what had originally been an overwhelming blockade into a scattered collection of ships struggling to communicate effectively with one another. Back within the station, Mara's team continued their careful work, moving through remaining corridors and securing additional key positions, always prioritizing control over conflict wherever possible. Several Dominion security personnel, finding themselves suddenly isolated and unable to communicate with their command structure, chose simply to stand down rather than continue resisting a situation that had clearly shifted well beyond what they had originally prepared for. "Commander," Mara's voice came through my earpiece again, roughly 20 minutes after our initial action began. "Station fully secured, minimal resistance encountered throughout, all hostile personnel contained without significant incident." I felt a wave of quiet relief wash through me at those words. Our goal throughout this entire mission had never been unnecessary conflict, only careful, controlled response to whatever the Dominion had planned against us. Hearing that Mara's team had accomplished their objective with minimal incident meant everything had unfolded closer to our hopes than our fears. "Excellent work," I said quietly into my earpiece, before turning my full attention back toward Ambassador Threll. His expression had shifted once more, the cold calculation replaced now by something closer to genuine defeat. Whatever plan he and his superiors had constructed so carefully, whatever moment they had been building toward through 2 days of polite conversation and hidden fleet movements, that plan now lay completely dismantled around him. "It appears," I said gently, "that your station now belongs to considerably calmer hands than originally intended." Threll said nothing for a long moment, simply staring at the table between us, his earlier confidence replaced entirely by quiet, controlled frustration. "What happens now, Commander?" he finally asked. I considered his question carefully before answering, understanding that everything I said in this moment would carry significant weight, not just for the immediate situation surrounding us, but for whatever came afterward between our two peoples. "Now," I said, "we finished the conversation you originally invited us here to have, except this time, Ambassador, we will speak honestly, without hidden fleets, without disabled communication devices, and without any further pretense regarding the true purpose of this summit." Threll studied me carefully, something shifting slowly behind his expression that I could not immediately identify. Perhaps grudging respect, perhaps simple exhaustion at having his careful plan so thoroughly unraveled, perhaps something closer to genuine curiosity about a species his people had clearly badly underestimated. "Very well, Commander," he said quietly. "It appears I have considerably less choice in this matter than I originally believed." Outside the station, our fleet continued securing the scattered remains of the Dominion's original blockade, working carefully to minimize unnecessary confrontation wherever possible. Within the station itself, Mara's team maintained careful control over key positions, ensuring our continued safety without resorting to anything beyond what circumstances genuinely required. And within this quiet negotiation chamber, surrounded by the wreckage of a carefully constructed trap that had failed to close around us, I found myself finally sitting across from an honest opponent, one no longer hiding behind careful diplomatic language or false warmth. Whatever came next, I understood clearly that humanity had proven something important today, not through unnecessary aggression, but through careful preparation, patient discipline, and the quiet, unshakable determination that had carried us through 20 years of a war we were never supposed to survive. The trap had failed. And now, finally, the real conversation could begin. The quiet that settled over Threshold Station did not last long. I was still seated across from Ambassador Threll, working through the early, careful stages of what I hoped would become genuine negotiation, when Adebayo's voice returned urgently through my earpiece. "Commander," he said, "I need you to see something immediately." I excused myself briefly, a habit I had grown accustomed to over the past 2 days, and made my way quickly toward the station's security hub, now firmly under Mara's control. Renshaw met me there, along with Adebayo, both studying a wide display showing updated sensor readings from beyond the station. "What is it?" I asked. "A second fleet," Adebayo said, "considerably larger than the blockade formation we already engaged. It emerged from a concealed position roughly 40 minutes ago, moving directly toward this system." I studied the display carefully, watching the slow, steady approach of dozens of new contacts, far more numerous than the original blockade we had already disrupted. "How long until they arrive?" "Based on their current speed, approximately 3 hours," Adebayo said. "This must be their true reinforcement," Renshaw said quietly. "I suspect the original blockade was never intended as their primary force, Commander. It was simply meant to hold this station secure until a larger fleet arrived to finish whatever plan they originally constructed." I felt the weight of this new information settle heavily across my shoulders. We had successfully disrupted the immediate danger surrounding us, but if Renshaw's assessment proved correct, an even greater threat now approached, one considerably larger than anything we had originally prepared to face. "Do we have enough strength to withstand a fleet this size?" I asked. Adebayo hesitated before answering. "Our current forces, combined with the station's now secured defenses, would face significant difficulty against a fleet of this scale, Commander. I do not believe we could hold this position successfully through direct confrontation alone." I studied the approaching contacts carefully, my mind working quickly through every option available to us. Direct confrontation against a fleet this size would likely end poorly, regardless of how carefully we had prepared. But retreating entirely would mean abandoning the station, along with whatever advantage we had gained through our earlier action, and potentially left our people vulnerable during withdrawal. "Renshaw," I said, "you mentioned earlier that our fleet had been monitoring Dominion movements for some time before our arrival here. How thoroughly?" "Quite thoroughly," Renshaw confirmed. "Fleet Command grew suspicious of this summit weeks before we ever departed, Commander. They authorized extensive reconnaissance throughout this entire region, tracking Dominion fleet movements far more carefully than official channels would typically allow." Something began forming clearly in my mind as he spoke, a possibility I had not fully considered until this exact moment. "Adebayo," I said, "contact our fleet commander directly. I want to know exactly what additional forces Fleet Command positioned throughout this region before our departure." He worked quickly, establishing a secure connection through channels we had prepared specifically for emergencies exactly like this one. Within minutes, the calm, steady voice of Admiral Reyes, commanding our primary support fleet stationed at the system's edge, came through clearly. "Commander Voss," Reyes said, "I understand you have encountered some complications." "Considerable complications, Admiral," I said. "We are currently tracking a second Dominion fleet approaching this system, considerably larger than the original blockade formation we already addressed. Adebayo estimates their arrival within 3 hours." "I am already aware," Reyes said, and something in his tone suggested a calm confidence I had not expected given the circumstances. "Commander, I believe it is time you understood the full scope of Fleet Command's preparation for this mission." "Please, Admiral, I am listening carefully." "When intelligence first suspected this treaty might serve as a trap," Reyes explained, "Fleet Command authorized considerably more than simply preparing your delegation carefully. We have spent the past 3 weeks tracking Dominion fleet movements throughout this entire region, identifying exactly where their reserves were likely stationed, and preparing our own response accordingly." I felt a slow, cautious relief beginning to settle through the tension gathered tightly in my chest. "You anticipated this second fleet." "We suspected it strongly," Reyes confirmed. "Our analysts believed the Dominion would not risk their entire plan on a single blockade formation alone, not for an operation of this scale and importance. We positioned additional forces throughout this region weeks ago, specifically to respond to exactly this scenario, should it occur." "Where are these additional forces now?" I asked. "Currently holding concealed positions along 3 separate approach vectors surrounding the system," Reyes said. "Positions selected specifically because they intersect with the most likely paths any reinforcing Dominion fleet would need to travel through to reach Threshold Station." I studied the display, showing the approaching Dominion fleet, understanding now exactly what Reyes was describing. Fleet Command had not simply prepared us for the possibility of betrayal during the summit itself. They had prepared an entire secondary layer of response, anticipating that any trap sprung against our delegation would likely require additional Dominion forces to complete successfully, and positioning our own reserves specifically to intercept exactly that response. "You built a trap for their trap," I said quietly. "In essence, yes," Reyes said, and I could hear the careful satisfaction in his voice. "Commander, if the Dominion truly intended to use overwhelming force to eliminate your delegation and secure this station permanently, They would need considerably more than the blockade formation you already encountered. We simply ensured that whatever additional forces they required would find themselves walking into difficulty long before reaching this system. I felt something close to genuine admiration settle alongside my earlier relief. 20 years of war had taught Fleet Command valuable lessons about anticipating not just the Dominion's immediate actions, but the broader patterns behind their strategic thinking. This entire mission, it seemed, had been prepared with considerably more depth than even I had fully understood before this moment. "What are your orders, Admiral?" I asked. "Maintain your current position at Threshold Station," Reyes said. "Continue securing the station and preparing for whatever negotiations follow from this situation. Our forces will intercept the approaching Dominion fleet along their current trajectory, well before they reach this system." I relayed this information quickly to Renshaw and Adebayo, watching their expressions shift from cautious concern towards something closer to steady confidence. We returned our attention to the display, watching carefully as the approaching Dominion fleet continued its steady advance toward Threshold Station, unaware of the additional forces waiting quietly along their path. Roughly 2 hours later, Adebayo's systems picked up the first signs of engagement occurring along the Dominion fleet's approach vector, considerably earlier than their expected arrival at our station. Communication remained limited given the distances involved, but the fragments we managed to intercept painted a clear picture of what was unfolding. Our concealed forces, having studied Dominion fleet patterns extensively over the preceding weeks, executed a series of carefully coordinated maneuvers designed to fracture the approaching fleet's cohesion before it ever reached its intended destination. Rather than meeting the Dominion's numerical advantage with direct confrontation, our ships focused on disrupting their communication and coordination systems, using tactics refined over years of hard-won experience fighting against exactly this kind of overwhelming force. Within another hour, Reyes contacted us again, his voice carrying clear satisfaction beneath its usual calm professionalism. "Commander Voss," he said, "I am pleased to report that the approaching Dominion fleet has been successfully intercepted and scattered. Their coordination systems suffered significant disruption during our engagement, forcing the majority of their remaining vessels to withdraw rather than continue toward Threshold Station." I felt genuine relief wash through me at these words, understanding clearly just how differently this entire situation might have unfolded without Fleet Command's extensive preparation. "Casualties, Admiral?" "Minimal on our side," Reyes said. "Our tactics focused primarily on disruption rather than direct confrontation, precisely as intended. The Dominion fleet experienced considerably more significant losses, though I want to stress that our forces made every reasonable effort to avoid unnecessary escalation beyond what the situation genuinely required." I nodded slowly, appreciating that restraint, understanding clearly that our goal throughout this entire mission had never been unnecessary conflict, only careful, controlled response proportional to whatever the Dominion had genuinely attempted against us. "Thank you, Admiral," I said. "Please relay my genuine gratitude to every soldier involved in this engagement." "I will, Commander," Reyes said. "And Commander, if I may say so, your own actions aboard Threshold Station played a critical role in exposing this entire situation clearly enough for our preparation to matter. Well done." I returned to the negotiation chamber shortly afterward, finding Ambassador Threll waiting quietly. His advisors gathered nervously around him. I suspected he had already received some indication of the failed reinforcement fleet through whatever limited communication remained available to him, given the expression now settled across his features. "Ambassador Threll," I said, taking my seat once more across from him, "I believe we have considerably more to discuss now than we did even an hour ago." Threll studied me carefully, something shifting behind his expression that I recognized immediately, having seen it occasionally throughout 20 years of difficult encounters with the Dominion. It was the particular look of an opponent finally understanding, completely and without remaining doubt, that they had significantly underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. "It appears," he said quietly, "that humanity's preparation extended considerably further than I originally believed possible." "It did, Ambassador," I said. "Perhaps now, we can finally have the honest conversation you originally claimed to want." Outside the station, the scattered remains of what had once been an overwhelming Dominion reinforcement fleet continued withdrawing slowly back toward their own territory, their carefully constructed plan lying completely in ruins behind them. And within this quiet chamber, surrounded by the wreckage of a trap that had failed twice now, rather than once, I finally allowed myself to believe that something genuine might yet emerge from this long, difficult summit. In the quiet hours following the failed reinforcement fleet's withdrawal, Threshold Station settled into an uneasy calm. Mara's team maintained careful control over key positions throughout the corridors, while our fleet, now fully visible and firmly in control of the surrounding space, held steady watch over whatever remained of the Dominion's original blockade formation. I spent that evening reviewing reports with Renshaw and Priya, trying to understand exactly what had truly happened here and why. 2 failed attempts against us, one immediate and one delayed, both clearly planned with considerable resources and effort. Yet something about the entire situation still felt incomplete to me, a piece of the puzzle I could not quite fit into place. "I want to speak with Threll directly," I told Renshaw the following morning. "Not across a negotiation table, surrounded by advisors and careful diplomatic language. I want an honest conversation, one-on-one, away from whatever performance both sides have been managing since our arrival." "Do you believe he will speak honestly?" Renshaw asked. "I believe," I said, "that a man who has just watched 2 carefully prepared plans fail completely might finally have less reason to continue hiding behind careful words." Mara arranged the meeting for later that morning, in a smaller private room away from the main negotiation hall, one of her soldiers standing quietly outside the door, though I asked that no one else be present inside beyond myself and Ambassador Threll. He arrived looking considerably different from the confident diplomat who had greeted us upon our arrival 2 days earlier. His posture remained formal, but something in his expression had shifted, a weariness I recognized easily from 20 years of watching similar expressions settle across the faces of soldiers on both sides of this long, difficult war. "Commander Voss," he said, taking the seat across from me, "I confess I did not expect a private conversation. I thought perhaps we might speak more honestly without an audience," I said. "I have questions, Ambassador, and I believe you have answers. I would like to understand exactly what happened here, and why." Threll studied me for a long moment before responding, seeming to weigh something carefully within his own mind. "What would you like to know, Commander? Whose plan was this?" I asked directly. "Was this treaty genuinely intended as a path toward peace, corrupted somewhere along the way? Or was deception the intention from the very beginning?" Threll was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting briefly toward the small window along the room's far wall, where distant stars remained visible beyond the glass. "The truth, Commander, is considerably more complicated than either simple explanation," he said finally. "The Dominion is not a single unified voice, despite whatever impression our long history of conquest may have given your people. There are factions within our leadership, considerable disagreement regarding how this war should proceed, or whether it should continue at all." "Continue," I said quietly. "There is a faction among our leadership," Threll explained, "that genuinely believes this war has cost the Dominion far more than any conquest could ever justify. They see your species' unexpected resilience as proof that continuing this conflict serves no one, and they have argued for genuine peace for several years now, though their voice has remained a minority within our broader governing council." "And the treaty itself?" "The treaty was genuinely drafted by that faction," Threll said. "I believe, sincerely, that the terms we discussed over these past 2 days represented an authentic attempt toward lasting peace between our peoples." "Then explain the blockade," I said. "Explain the reinforcement fleet." Threll sighed, a surprisingly human gesture that seemed to carry considerable weight behind it. A separate faction within our council, For Cathlar, considerably more powerful than the one advocating peace, viewed this summit as an opportunity rather than a genuine diplomatic effort. They saw the possibility of gathering your delegation's most valuable military and political leadership into a single, contained location as too tempting an opportunity to ignore, regardless of whatever genuine intentions the treaty's original authors held. "So the peace faction wrote an honest treaty," I said slowly, understanding beginning to settle clearly in my mind, while a separate, more aggressive faction quietly arranged to use that same treaty as bait, for an entirely different purpose. "Precisely," Threll confirmed. "I was placed in an extremely difficult position, Commander. I genuinely believed in the terms we discussed. I also understood from the very beginning that considerable forces beyond my control had been positioned around this station, forces I held no authority to prevent or dismiss." I studied him carefully, weighing the honesty behind his words against everything we had already discovered through our own intelligence gathering. "Why tell me this now, Ambassador? What benefit does this honesty provide you?" Threll met my gaze directly, something resigned but genuine, settling clearly across his expression. "Because your actions here, Commander, have already exposed the truth far beyond anything I could hide or deny. 2 failed operations, witnessed not just by your own forces, but by every neutral observer present throughout this station. Whatever aggressive faction arranged this trap has now suffered a defeat too significant to conceal from the rest of our governing council." Understanding settled fully into place within my mind. You believe this failure will strengthen the peace faction's position. I believe it already has, Threll said. Word of these events will reach our homeworld within days, Commander, regardless of anything either of us does. When our council learns that an aggressive faction risked considerable resources on a plan that failed twice, embarrassingly, against a delegation that anticipated and outmaneuvered every step of their preparation, it will not reflect well on those who advocated for continued conflict. I considered this carefully, understanding now the true shape of the situation we had walked into, considerably more complicated than the simple trap we had originally suspected. Then perhaps, I said slowly, there is still genuine opportunity within this failure, Ambassador. I believe there may be, Threll said, though I understand if your trust in anything my government offers has been considerably damaged by recent events. Trust must be rebuilt through action, not simply words, I said. But I am willing to continue this conversation honestly, Ambassador, if you are willing to do the same. Over the following days, working closely with Renshaw and our intelligence teams, we compiled a comprehensive account of everything that had transpired since our arrival at Threshold Station. The intercepted communications, the blockade formation, the reinforcement fleet's failed approach, all carefully documented alongside genuine footage captured by our own systems and corroborated by several neutral observers present throughout the summit. What do you intend to do with this evidence? Priya asked, as we reviewed the final compiled report together. I intend to make certain the truth reaches every world watching this conflict, I said. Not simply humanity's account of events, but verified evidence that cannot be easily denied or dismissed by whatever faction within the Dominion attempted this operation. We arranged for the compiled evidence to be transmitted through multiple channels simultaneously, ensuring it reached not just our own allied worlds, but several neutral territories who maintained careful, cautious relationships with the Dominion despite the ongoing conflict. Within days, reports began circulating widely, detailing the elaborate trap prepared against our delegation, alongside clear evidence of its complete failure against humanity's careful preparation. The response, when it came, arrived faster than I had expected. Threll contacted me directly 4 days after our private conversation, requesting an urgent meeting. Commander Voss, he said, his expression carrying something I had not seen from him previously, a genuine, cautious hope. I have received word from our homeworld. The Governing Council has convened an emergency session, specifically addressing the events surrounding this summit. And the outcome? I asked. The faction responsible for the reinforcement fleet has suffered significant consequences within our leadership structure, Threll said. Several key voices previously advocating for continued aggressive action have been removed from positions of authority. The peace faction, meanwhile, has gained considerable influence as a direct result of this failure. I felt something close to genuine hope settle carefully alongside my earlier caution. What does this mean for our continued negotiations, Ambassador? It means, Threll said, that I now speak with considerably more authority than I held when you first arrived at this station. The Council has authorized me to continue these discussions, this time backed by genuine consensus, rather than divided, competing factions working against one another. I studied him carefully, weighing this new information against everything we had already learned throughout this difficult, revealing summit. 20 years of war had taught me caution, and I did not intend to abandon that caution simply because circumstances appeared to be shifting favorably. Then let us continue, Ambassador, I said finally, carefully, honestly, and with full understanding of everything that has already occurred between us. Real peace, if it is genuinely possible between our peoples, must be built on exactly that kind of honesty, rather than the careful performances we exchanged during our first days here. Threll nodded slowly, something settling into his expression that looked remarkably like relief. I believe you are correct, Commander. Shall we begin again, properly this time? I thought of everything that had brought us to this exact moment. 20 years of loss and survival. A carefully constructed trap that had failed, not once but twice, against humanity's determined preparation. A fractured Dominion leadership, suddenly forced to reckon honestly with the true cost of continued conflict. Whatever emerged from these renewed negotiations, I understood clearly that we stood at a genuinely important moment, one that might finally determine whether this long, difficult war could reach an honest conclusion, or whether it would simply continue grinding forward, consuming more lives on both sides for years yet to come. Yes, Ambassador, I said, let us begin again. The negotiations that followed bore almost no resemblance to the careful, guarded performance we had exchanged during our first days aboard Threshold Station. Ambassador Threll arrived each morning without the elaborate ceremony that had once accompanied his every entrance. His advisors, too, seemed different, speaking with a directness that had been entirely absent before, as though the failure of their aggressive faction had finally given everyone remaining permission to simply say what they actually meant. We spent nearly 2 full weeks working through the genuine terms of what would eventually become the real peace treaty between humanity and the Krazathi Dominion. It was slow, careful work, nothing like the dramatic events that had unfolded during our first days at the station. Most mornings involved long discussions over border definitions, resource sharing agreements, and frameworks for handling future disputes without returning to open conflict. Afternoons often meant reviewing draft language line by line, Renshaw and Threll's own legal advisors working together to close every gap that had allowed the original treaty to hide so much beneath vague, careful wording. I found something quietly satisfying in this tedious, unglamorous process. 20 years of war had taught me to recognize the value of a difficult peace, one built through genuine effort rather than empty promises. Every long afternoon spent arguing over a single clause felt like a small victory, proof that both sides genuinely intended for this agreement to mean something lasting. "You seem different, Commander," Priya observed one evening, as we reviewed the day's progress together in my quarters aboard the Olive Branch. "Different how?" I asked. "Less guarded," she said. "During our first days here, I could see you cataloging every exit, every guard, every small detail that might matter if things went wrong. Now you seem almost relaxed." I considered her observation carefully before responding. "I suppose I am, somewhat," I admitted, "though I do not think the caution ever fully disappears, Priya. Not after everything we have lived through. I simply believe, for the first time in a very long while, that this particular danger has genuinely passed." "And the deeper danger?" she asked. "The larger war itself?" "That," I said, "remains to be seen. But I believe we have taken a genuine step toward ending it, rather than simply surviving another chapter within it." Dr. Renshaw proved instrumental throughout these 2 weeks, working tirelessly alongside Threll's own advisors to ensure the final treaty language left no room for the same careful ambiguity that had concerned him so deeply during his initial review. Every term was defined precisely, every troop limit specified with exact numbers rather than vague, comfortable phrases, every station, border region, and disputed territory clearly mapped and agreed upon by both parties, with careful provisions established for handling any future disagreement through communication, rather than conflict. "I want to be clear about something, Ambassador," I told Threll during one of our final review sessions, as we studied the treaty's completed draft together. "This document must protect both our peoples equally. I have no interest in a peace that simply shifts the advantage from your side to mine. I want something that genuinely lasts." Threll studied the document carefully before responding. "I share that goal completely, Commander. I have spent considerable time these past 2 weeks reflecting on everything that unfolded during your arrival here. I believe I understand now, more clearly than I ever did before, exactly why your species proved so difficult to conquer." "And why is that?" I asked, genuinely curious to hear his perspective after everything we had experienced together. "Because you never stop preparing," Threll said. "Even when circumstances appear peaceful, even when an invitation arrives dressed in warm, welcoming language, your people still quietly consider what might go wrong, and prepare accordingly. That is not weakness, Commander, despite what my own people believed about your species during the earliest days of this conflict. It is perhaps the greatest strength I have ever witnessed in any species we have encountered." I thought about his words carefully, understanding the truth within them, though tempered by everything I had personally witnessed throughout 20 years of hard, costly conflict. I would not call it strength alone, Ambassador. I would call it the lesson every difficult experience eventually teaches, if you survive long enough to learn from it. We did not begin this war prepared for everything. We learned to become prepared, one difficult loss at a time. "Perhaps that is the deepest strength of all," Threll said quietly. "The willingness to learn, rather than simply the willingness to fight." By the end of our second week aboard Threshold Station, the final treaty document sat complete, reviewed extensively by both delegations, along with several neutral observers who had remained present throughout this entire process, ensuring transparency and accountability on both sides. I read through the completed document one final time before our formal signing ceremony, comparing it carefully against the original treaty that had first arrived on that gray morning weeks earlier. The difference was significant. Where the original document had relied on vague, comfortable language, this final version specified everything clearly. Where the original had left troop presence undefined, this version established precise numbers, verified through mutual inspection rather than simple trust alone. Where the original had felt, in retrospect, like a carefully constructed door leading toward danger, this final document read like something genuinely built to last, created by people who understood exactly what had gone wrong the first time, and worked deliberately to ensure it could not happen again. The formal signing ceremony took place in the same negotiation chamber where our initial confrontation had unfolded weeks earlier, though the atmosphere within that room felt entirely different now. Neutral observers from several allied species watched carefully as I signed the completed treaty, followed by Ambassador Threll's own careful signature beside mine. "For 20 years," I said, addressing the gathered representatives once the formal signing concluded, "our two peoples have known each other only through conflict. I will not pretend that a single treaty, however carefully constructed, can immediately erase the losses both our sides have suffered throughout that long, difficult war. But I believe, genuinely, that this document represents something worth protecting. Not peace built from weakness or naive trust, but peace built through honest understanding, careful preparation, and genuine respect between two peoples who have finally learned exactly what the other is truly capable of." Threll spoke next, his translated words carrying a sincerity I had not heard from him during our first tense days together. The Kryzathi Dominion approached this summit divided. Commander Voss, though I did not fully understand the depth of that division until circumstances forced it clearly into view. I believe humanity's actions here, throughout these past weeks, have taught my people something important, something perhaps even more valuable than the treaty terms themselves. You have taught us that strength does not require domination, that preparation does not require aggression, and that lasting peace, when genuinely pursued, proves considerably more valuable than any conquest we might have achieved through continued conflict. As the ceremony concluded and the gathered representatives began departing, I found myself standing once more near the same wide viewing window where I had first noticed the concerning number of Dominion vessels visible along the station's docking rings, weeks earlier. The view outside had changed considerably since then. Where dozens of Dominion warships had once gathered quietly, positioning themselves for a trap none of us were meant to survive, only a handful of vessels remained now, present as legitimate diplomatic escort rather than concealed threat. Priya joined me quietly at the window, watching the same peaceful view alongside me. "Do you believe it will hold?" she asked. "This peace we have built here?" I considered her question carefully before answering, thinking of everything we had learned throughout this long, difficult mission. The careful preparation before our departure, the hidden technology waiting quietly beneath our ship's decking, the disciplined restraint shown by Mara's team throughout every stage of our confrontation, the patient, honest work completed over these final 2 weeks, building something considerably stronger than the fragile document that had first summoned us here. "I believe it has a genuine chance," I said finally. "Not because either side has become naive or trusting overnight, but because we have both learned exactly what the other is capable of, both in conflict and in genuine effort toward peace. That kind of honest understanding, earned through difficult experience rather than simple hope, tends to last considerably longer than agreements built on convenient assumptions." Priya nodded slowly, understanding completely. "And if it fails eventually? If some future crisis threatens to unravel everything we have built here?" I smiled slightly, thinking of my grandfather's farm, the strange colored sky, and everything that had followed throughout 20 long years of survival and growth. "Then we will do exactly what we have always done, Priya. We will prepare carefully, we will adapt quickly, and we will face whatever comes next with the same quiet determination that carried us this far already." As the olive branch finally departed Threshold Station several days later, beginning our long journey home, I stood once more at the observation deck, watching the station slowly shrink behind us, exactly as I had watched our home fleet shrink behind us weeks earlier during our initial departure. We had arrived at this station uncertain, carrying hope alongside careful preparation for whatever danger might be waiting for us. We had discovered a trap built carefully around the appearance of peace, and we had faced it not with unnecessary aggression, but with patient discipline and thorough readiness, earned through 20 difficult years of hard-won experience. And now, we were returning home carrying something considerably more valuable than we had dared hope for when this journey first began. Not a fragile ceasefire, easily broken by whichever faction happened to hold power on a given day, but a genuine foundation for lasting peace, built through honest confrontation, careful negotiation, and mutual respect earned the difficult way, through experience rather than empty promise. I thought again of my grandfather, and everyone else who had never lived to see this moment arrive. Their sacrifice, throughout all those difficult years, had finally led somewhere worth reaching. Humanity had been invited to a summit built as a trap. We had arrived prepared, patient and determined. And in the end, we had walked away with something considerably more valuable than victory alone. We had walked away with genuine peace, built to last.